Hello everyone, been a little while since I've done one of these collection videos, so today we're going to take a look at the Planet of the Apes. Tricked you a little bit there. The Planet of the Apes collection, starting off with this Legacy collection on DVD of all the classic films. And the Planet of the Apes was a franchise that I devoured in one sitting when I was a kid. At some point in elementary school, it was during the summer, and there was a Planet of the Apes marathon. I think it might have been the Sci-Fi Channel in the early days, but I'm not sure. I watched the first movie and was completely enthralled, and found out during one of the commercial breaks that there were a bunch more Planet of the Apes movies. I had never even heard of them before. I was definitely under 10 years old. I was pretty young, and I just watched them all in one long big marathon one summer evening. I think the first Planet of the Apes came on around dinner time. We watched it together, and that was the one night of the summer I was allowed to stay up late, and I devoured the entire original franchise and thought they were fantastic. Absolutely fell in love with them, and I remember really trying to stay up late and falling kind of asleep during the televised presentation then that they had of this behind the scenes hosted by Roddy McDowall. And to this day, one of the reasons why I like this DVD collection is this Planet of the Apes behind the scenes documentary. It is still, I've seen multiple other documentaries, I still think this is the overall best one that they've ever done for the original series of movies. And of course we have the original classic, one of the greatest all-time science fiction motion pictures, and a great morality tale, and one of the best examples of its era of analyzing humanity through a sci-fi lens that makes it easier in many cases with sci-fi and fantasy to examine these issues if you put it through allegory or through a fictional scenario involving some sort of mystical creature or alien or whatever. It helps people absorb and digest and really analyze that messaging more clearly. Then we have Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which was kind of an oddball one for me. I've always enjoyed it, but it's the behind the scenes are fantastic and why it kind of is what it is, and I always liked it, I think, more than most people. But my second favorite in the entire franchise then is Escape from the Planet of the Apes. I have always had a fondness for this one. I love the sense of humor and levity in it, and then it, as it progresses, becomes more and more serious, and I think has one of the saddest endings in the entire franchise, and just the performances are fantastic. That's always been one of my favorites. Again, my favorite is, of course, the original Planet of the Apes. Then Escape has always been my second favorite. Then we have Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, and this one, like many audiences when this first came out, I was a little bit shocked as a young kid, especially after the third movie, with the tone. It's one that I think was held back a little bit and was improved upon. This tale was improved upon with some of the remake trilogy stuff, which we'll get into. Fantastic movie, but I think just a little bit of the censorship at the time, that obvious 80-yard additional ending to the speech at the end. There's a few elements that kind of keep it from being quite up to the level of the first one for me, and then just my enjoyment of the third one. And then the one, even as a kid, was kind of a disappointment, was Battle for the Planet of the Apes. It's one of those that the scope of the storytelling that it was trying to get across was just limited way too much by budget constraints. That it wasn't as effective as it could have been. And even the more intimate storytelling elements weren't quite there. It was, again, these last two in particular, I think those concepts were revisited in the surprisingly good remake series. I think were improved upon. And of course the behind the scenes. So I've always really enjoyed that DVD box set. I had a VHS version of this, very similar, when I was a kid, and just these have always been classic favorite movies. So I have to have them on Blu-ray as well in this Legacy collection. This is actually one of the earliest Blu-ray sets we ever owned. It's a great set, just a good way of having an updated version of these on the format. And if it's a sci-fi classic, I have to have it on Laserdisc. So we had the original Planet of the Apes, the special edition widescreen. All the older Planet of the Apes movies were released on Laserdisc a couple of times, including a Japanese box set. I just have the first one on the format, and it is one of these nice gatefold releases, which I love to have on Laserdisc. And a 35th anniversary edition, again, of just the first movie. It's my absolute favorite, a sci-fi classic that's stuck with me forever, so that's why this is the one that I have several different versions of. It's one that every few years or so I will revisit. This is a nice 2-disc set for that one. And then moving into, strangely, the only Planet of the Apes movie that I've ever seen in movie theaters. We have the Planet of the Apes, the Mark Wahlberg movie, the Tim Burton version of Planet of the Apes, which is odd. I don't think... Some people say it's a terrible movie. I don't think it's a terrible movie. I just think it is a slightly misguided take on the original. It's interesting, but no matter what, when you're trying to really remake a classic movie, that's hard to do, and you're going to be compared to something that has been put up on a pedestal for decades. It's really hard, and I do think it was a creative effort. I don't dislike it as much as most people do, but it is probably my least favorite in the franchise overall. It has some interesting takes on some of the ape behavior, feeling a little less humanized. So it's an interesting movie, but overall it was just kind of okay, and really just, it didn't recapture the quality of the original movie that it needed to, and I don't think it ever really stood a chance at doing it. But that is why we have this DVD set here of the new Ape trilogy, and there's going to be a fourth one coming out in 2024, which is why I wanted to go ahead and do this. And that should be interesting, because this is really a really good, conclusive trilogy. It really works perfectly as a trilogy. And because of the other one and my love of the original movies, I did not see Rise in theaters. I saw it years later on a Blu-ray copy that we had, and I was shocked. I was surprised, because obviously from the previews of all three of these movies that I saw over the years, visually it was going to look great. I think it's one of the rare examples of a very CG heavy movie that I actually enjoy. Most of the time, especially getting into the age of regressing CG as we just kind of pump it out through all these Marvel things and whatever, a lot of it I just go back to practical stuff. But here is a shining example of it done right, and just everything is fantastic. Andy Serkis is brilliant in here as Caesar, and just Rise blew me away, especially because I think they didn't repeat the same mistake as the Tim Burton one. They didn't just try and remake the original Planet of the Apes. It's a reimagining, starting the story farther along in the franchise, and I feel like that was a smarter decision to kind of reimagine that storyline from the origins of the ape, rather than going and trying to redo the original telling, especially when it's wouldn't be a surprise in what's going on with the Planet of the Apes and that it's Earth, and just wouldn't work. I think a straight remake. So they did a very smart thing. The performances are great. The alterations to the storytelling really worked, and it started off a fresh trilogy in a fantastic way. I was very pleasantly surprised. And it continued with an even higher degree of quality, I think, in Dawn and War. And it's hard to decide between the two. I think Dawn might be my favorite, but I could easily go with War as well. The two of them are brilliant movies. They are some of the best movies of the last 15 years or whatever. Just fantastic. It creates a wonderful trilogy. The performances are amazing. I mean, you really feel for these ape characters as much as any just human performance. It's just fantastically well done. The action, the storytelling is brilliant. They're really good movies. I think Dawn and War, Rise, as much as I loved it, I think Dawn and War take it to a whole new level. And really, I think my top 4 in the entire franchise would include Dawn and War, which is surprising from a remake trilogy. The Original is, of course, my favorite, and then Escape I just have this nostalgic attachment to. But as far as quality, this is such a great cohesive trilogy that redoes the tale of the Planet of the Apes in a brilliant way. And there's a chance that the newer ones could be just as good, so definitely I'll have to keep my eye out for what they do with this franchise, considering this is one of the very rare exceptions of a remake slash reboot series of movies that is honestly about as good as the originals.